I think anyone who's a creative person has that little glitch in your head. That's where the creativity comes from, the highs and lows of emotion and in your brain. It's a blessing and a curse, and that's why talking about it and normalizing it is so important.
We don't listen to music that's just about I'm fine or it's an adequate day. It's kind of a spectacle. You want to see people who are struggling with things that you maybe can relate to, and the loudest voices or the most articulate ones are the ones that are experiencing these things very, very intensely.
My guess that maybe people who are suffering from these things end up spending some time alone in a room with an instrument and find inspiration and voice in that. And there are some of those people that are really talented and then lucky enough to meet people to build this this skill into being in a band.
Like you get into music because you need an outlet. You want something that you can call your own, because there is this whole side of the world that you feel that doesn't necessarily understand you and doesn't necessarily get you. So you create a world for yourself, and then what happens is that you when you become successful is that those things don't necessarily go away, but it does become amplified.
I think it's creative people in general. I mean, I know a lot of artists, painters, sculptors. I myself have suffered from depression on and off. A lot worse when I was younger, but I just think it's creative people. I don't know what it is. Maybe it's a gene.
Yeah, I mean, my thought on that is people who are artists or musicians, you have to come from a really vulnerable position and a really open position in order to fully express your art. And I think people recognize that, and that's what allows people to gravitate towards your art. But at the same time, that openness, puts you at a disadvantage as far as judgment and whatever else.
I think that the those who are sort of most creative in a compelling way, sometimes brains are just organized differently, and it's one. I mean, you see it, whether it's with depression or schizophrenia or addiction, that those things are present in a lot of the greatest musicians of all time.
Artistry of any kind, I think, is something like you tap into something internal which needs to come out. And I think when you're talking in terms of mental illness, it's a very good canvas for being able to bring out something which you can't express in another way, which is like what a lot of the illness side of these things is about, is you can't quite understand or release what's going on inside of you.
In order to be someone that is an artist, you have to be a little eccentric. It isn't every person that can create in that way. So it takes a certain type of persona, a certain type of individual. And sometimes those individuals can be incredibly fragile. They can be incredibly haunted. And they can be very unsure of themselves, even though their art is fantastic. They can be very self-deprecating. And when you throw yourself into this world where there are so many eyes on you, and every action is under the microscope, and every word that comes out of your mouth is weighed, it can be a hell of a burden.
I mean, it's actually quite a vicious cycle too. You go into this because you're trying to find respite. You're trying to find somewhere to be free and to let go and maybe to figure yourself out. And then you find out when you get into the industry that it becomes quite thankless. It's grueling. And also it eviscerates you. It takes so much out of you to tour and then to be judged all the time. You're trying to get away from judgment most of the time, and then you're being judged all the time.
What being a creative person on the road is, I definitely think people underestimate what actually goes into being in a band. When you're talking about things like depression and anxiety, like throwing yourself forward in time and obsessing about that, or looking at the past, something like that, that's literally what your life is as a musician. Like you have years of your life planned out, which are then, for better or worse, hung in front of you as responsibility.
The music business has a lot of extreme highs and lows, and I think people who have mental problems have a lot of highs and lows, and it's just you're kind of pushed into that world. You know, we're on stage having the best moments of our lives, and then the next day something terrible could happen in this business.
There's this great little what's called perk you get with this job, is that at the end of your work day you get applauded and people will say really, really nice things about you to your face. Then a huge bunch of people will say awful things about you behind your back. And if you are fragile to begin with, and you are looking for some validation, and you miss something on a deeper level, the music business is full of superficial solutions to those things. If you don't have a good, solid foundation, and you let that be the answers to your problems and questions and hardships, you are in trouble.
But touring, like once we gained some popularity and got more successful, obviously we're out touring all the time. And that environment is bad for you on many levels. I mean, you're away from, if you have children, family back home, that's shit.
You know, we talk about the post-tour depression all the time too, where it's like when everything makes sense on tour, like you have your world and you have this adoration and you have people literally, you know, telling you that you are great and that you're doing the right thing and that you have become this thing. And then you come off of that and you can't really get that from anywhere else, which then leads to drug abuse and alcoholism, and because you're trying to keep that feeling, you know, going.
Yeah, that feeling after
it's
a show
a vicious
is
cycle.
Yeah, is something that you can't recreate.
When I first started, you know, you see other bands falling into traps, and whether it be drugs or suicide or whatnot, that would never happen to me and my friends. And then little by little, one person goes down. The next I've had dozens of friends go down, you know, as far as drugs or depression or just, you know, prison, you know, lots of different stories.
I think that it's always been an issue. I mean, clearly it has. The life of living out on the road is it's just very stressful. And I think for most people to want to do that, there's usually something going on.
As someone like who is on the road, like I can tell you the lifestyle of all of a sudden going out on stage, being bombarded by this energy of people who have reacted to something that you've created. And it can be so wonderful and it can be so terrifying at the same time. And then all of a sudden switching off and going back to a normal life where that doesn't exist, for better or worse. And then being like bouncing between those two things is crazy. Like it does your head in.
But also, you know, touring life is hard. It can be really lonely, and it's easy to lean on vices. You know, it's easy to get drunk and numb yourself or get fucked up and do drugs, weed, coke, whatever the fuck gets you through. And that's a part of the lifestyle too. Not for everybody, but you know, and then those vices, especially drinking, if you drink a lot, that can really exacerbate depression. That can really make you feel lonely and like useless and worthless.
Being on a tour bus with lots of other people, no privacy, lots of drinks, there might be drugs, people want to get to you, you're never alone, you're just an animal in a cage. And after a few years of doing that, you're bound to change.
The loneliness that is involved with living the life that we do can be very, very damaging. People fall prey to addiction in this line of work of ours because there is so much of it. There's so much loneliness. There's so much sacrifice. There's so much, detachment from a normal life.
It's very hard to explain it to anyone who's not actually in the situation. And I definitely think it needs to be I don't know if there's a fix for it, but people need to be aware of it because it's real. It's 100% real.
I think that now that there's a greater sort of realization, not just among musicians, but widespread, that these are, like, if you break your arm, you go to the doctor. If you feel depressed, you can also go to the doctor or seek help and not sort of suffer alone and in silence.
We're making good steps. You know, there's a lot more outlets and organizations that like really specifically target mental health, specifically in the music world. And yeah, I mean, it's one of those things like anything else. It's going to take time and work.
It's a beautiful thing. You're creating something beautiful. but it also, you have to accept it is what it is, and you have to have something to fall back on mentally. And I think people are just, get very lost out there.
And people will say, oh, cry me a river, you rock stars, you have everything in the world. And like, it's not about that when it comes to these diseases. You can have everything in the world. That's the biggest misconception about it, is that people think if you're so blessed, how could you possibly fall prey to addiction or depression? How could you think of taking your own life? Because cancer doesn't care about how successful you are. Doesn't care about how many children you have, how beautiful your family is. Cancer takes you. It's no different. And that stigma that's attached to it, that misconception, is part of the reason why it's gone unabated. And people don't truly understand the true nature of it.
Got to keep talking about it, normalize that shit, and let people know that they're not alone in this fight, man.